She's the vice president of Family PAC Federal, which is a national conservative political action committee that focuses on both economic and social issues and works to support candidates that share our values. She's also a Fox News contributor and a regular on the Megyn Kelly Show, among others on leading shows on the Fox News Network. She's a national columnist and host of Sandy Rios in the Morning on American Family Radio Talk. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sandy Rios in the Morning.
I might dance or something. Pretty cool. Good morning. How are you? You know, I also, Gil, thank you. I am the Director of Governmental Affairs for the American Family Association. Ironically, I worked very closely with Don Wildman, who was the founder back in 1979 when I was president of Concerned Women for America. I love Don. Principled, unapologetic, my kind of guy. And now I'm working with his son, Tim, also principled, unapologetic, my kind of guy. I'm really proud to be working with the American Family Association. And you probably don't know, since they're not based here, the reach that they have. It's pretty phenomenal. 190 radio stations around the country. We have a journal that has 200,000 subscribers, and we have 1 million online supporters of our ministry. And there's a lot more to say about American Family Association, but we pack a pretty good wallop, even if you're not hearing about it all the time. So the voter guide is going to be fabulous. It's going to be online in a couple of weeks. It'll be a tool for all of us to use, so I encourage you to look at that. Also, we'd love to have you listen to our broadcasts. I'm on every morning from 8 to 9 on AFR Talk. So it's Sandy Rios in the morning, and then we have great shows all day long. I do news and politics. Is that a surprise? Anyone? Yeah. And so I love it. It's a great privilege for me. You know, AFA is well known for their positions on the moral issues. We are, one of the SPLC's hate groups. We're, I think, number one on the list, because we don't like the things. We believe that God and His values are best for people and should be embraced, continue to be embraced by this culture. We are unapologetic about that. But I'm not here today to talk to you, shockingly enough, about those issues. I talk about them all the time. I'm not going to talk to you about gay marriage. I'm not going to talk to you about abortion or contraceptive or any of those things. I want to talk to you about something that I think has developed in our country over the past few years that trumps my concern about all of those things. It's deeper than behavior. It's more concerning than bad public policy, and it's what God hates most about our country. It is her most corrupting characteristic, her most unredeeming quality, and it is the one that will destroy her. That problem that we have, that thing that we suffer from, is pride. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about. First of all, I want to tell you what God thinks about pride, because I think it's a pretty interesting story. Saul was you don't know. Some of you don't know. So let me explain. Saul was the first king of Israel. Great-looking guy, tall, big, great in battle. And so the people wanted a king, and the prophet Samuel picked Saul, anointed him, and then Saul won several battles, and then he got to thinking that he was a pretty cool guy. And he decided that he knew better than God. When God would give him a direction, Saul would do it his own way, or maybe sort of honor God, but do a slight variation. And finally, he got so puffed up in his own ability to make decisions that rather than consulting God, he consulted the witch of Endor. And so this once successful king ended up dying at the hand of God, punished for his rebellion and pride. And then we find this verse in Scripture. Samuel said to him, "Rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry." Now, rebellion is something that we do, and rebellion would come under the category of those moral issues that I'm not going to speak about. But pride is an attitude of the heart. It's out of pride that we rebel. We know better. Really, you don't really expect me not to live with my boyfriend, do you? Really, I mean, that's kind of silly. I mean, that's, I really know better, and this is what my friends are doing, etc. All the decisions that we make, you fill in the blanks. It's pride that causes us to rebel. This is an interesting passage in Proverbs, and it says that there are 6 things that the Lord hates, and 7, really, it says. And the first one on the list, anybody know? Haughty eyes. Now, indulge me just a second, because the rest of the list is so compelling. I'm not going to speak about them, but I want you to hear about them. He hates haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush to evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and guess what? A person who stirs up conflict in the community. I could make speeches on each one of those, but I'm going to concentrate on haughty eyes. I like to listen to Car Talk, I confess, on NPR on Saturday mornings. Love it. Click and Clack, you guys ever listen? They did a shtick recently that just had us, my husband and I, in stitches. And it was, you know, when you were a kid and you learned to do something, or you could jump high, or you learned to ski, and you'd say, "Watch this," you know? And then it'd usually be a disaster, because you want people to watch this. So they did a whole long thing on people just absolutely meeting disaster after shouting in prideful glee, "Watch this." And the scriptures tell us that pride comes before a fall. In Isaiah, we find out that Satan, Lucifer, the person that Saul Alinsky dedicated his book, Rules for Radicals, to, fell from heaven because of what? Rebellion and pride. He was beautiful, he was good, he was smart, and he didn't really need to acknowledge God. I'm talking about pride in America, but let me tell you what I'm not speaking about. I'm not talking about pride in our history. I'm not talking about pride in our accomplishments. I'm talking about the kind of pride that is devoid of acknowledging God, the kind that's boastful and arrogant and baseless. The pride God hates is, simply put, self-worship. Let's go back to that haughty eyes thing. Now let me see. You watch the news, right? You see haughty eyes everywhere. We see them in politicians, in presidents, in pundits, in State Department officials, in IRS operatives, in TV anchors, in media moguls, in Hollywood stars. You see it. It's like a slight glint. It's a smirk. It's an arrogance of spirit. It's haughty eyes, number one on the list of what God hates. Everybody remembers where they were on 9/11, the very first one, and I certainly remember that I was in North Korea. It's a long story about why I was there. Very few Americans, certainly at that time, had ever been in North Korea. There were only 6 of us, and we were visiting the schools, watching the children, the little automated children doing their perfectly executed movements, and we came back over the border of northern Manchuria, and this is like the old Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin. It's very well guarded. It's very tense. I could talk hours about North Korea. But we came back across the border, and we were told on 9/12 what had happened in New York and here in Washington. We went to an apartment on this top floor in the dark and turned on CNN International and watched the bodies fall. And I remember being on my knees, rocking, just thinking, we're at war, and I'll never get home. I'll never get back to my children. But we then were stranded in Beijing for a long time before we could come back. And every night we would tune into CNN International just for craving news about home. And I knew the world had changed when I watched a CNN anchor ask a pastor sitting next to him on the set in primetime television to pray. I knew that the world had changed when we saw people on their knees on street corners. We saw God Bless America everywhere. We're watching this from Beijing. I knew my country had changed, and it was amazing. For many Americans on September 11th, turning to the God of their fathers was as natural as breathing. But somehow, that's changed. In 13 short years after such a devastating attack and loss, rather than examining ourselves as a nation and seeking God, forces among us have been systematically extricating him. Quaint complaints of removing prayer from schools in the 60s and the Ten Commandments displays in the 90s and the early 2000s have given way to an absolute all-out attempt to purge God from every sphere of American life. President Obama has told us repeatedly, we aren't a Christian nation. You know, he tells us that a lot, and perhaps he's right. 10 years after Dr. Billy Graham addressed the nation on 9/11 in the National Cathedral, Franklin Graham was banned from participating in the National Day of Prayer in the Pentagon. At the 2012 National Democratic Convention, there was a vote to remove God from anywhere in their platform. Christians are being sued, harassed, losing jobs and influence in every sphere of public life. 13 years ago, we had a pastor praying on CNN in Lifetime. But you know what? It's not just Democrats or the left who have ignored God. Republican leaders are embarrassed by the moral issues that necessarily emanate from really honoring God. Conservative groups tread carefully, trying to find new ways to claim service while staying safe. Ronald Reagan's bold colors and passionate declarations about God are hard to find. We speak in coded terms, not daring to actually speak of God. And in the vacuum of not acknowledging Him, we have become foolish. Remember the Boston Marathon when 3 were killed and hundreds were wounded and the Chechnyan brothers were in the news and Boston was just devastated. There was a service, a general service, and Tom Menino, the mayor of Boston, praised the first responders, rightly so. They certainly were heroes. But then he strangely added, "We got past this because we are Boston strong." You know, it wasn't God that gave the rescuers strength or prevented more death. It wasn't Him that had any part in the healing of Boston. It was the innate strength of the people of Boston that brought them through. They were Boston strong. A year later, in that same place, in commemoration of that terrible event, Vice President Joe Biden declared in the same spot, "We are America. We own the finish line." We own the finish line. And just 4 weeks ago, after those gruesome beheadings of journalists James Foley and Stephen Sotloff, it was Joe Biden who gave the strongest public response, declaring, "We will follow them to the gates of hell." And how are we going to do that? He said, "Because we are Boston strong." Empty boasts and thankless hearts will not protect us from the next terror attack. All the fine first responders, the best equipment, the best equipment in the military will not save us. Remember those Benghazi warriors that were on with Brett Baer recently on that special about 13 hours? Do you remember? I mean, these guys are fit, they are buff, they are equipped, they are trained, they know what to do, and yet they were so open about their humility before God. We saw them praying with their families. We heard that they prayed over the body of Tyrone Woods. I mean, warriors know where their strength comes from. David and Goliath, great story if you don't know it. This young shepherd boy was delivering food to his brother who was in battle. And Goliath the giant, the Philistine, comes out to taunt the Jews and say, "Who's going to fight me?" You know, and blah, 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 blah. And little David, who, you know, doesn't have anything. He doesn't have armor. He says, "I'll fight him." In fact, he says, what does he say? I wrote it down. Oh, I'll get to that in just a second. His declaration is, who is this uncircumcised Philistine who dares to threaten the armies of the Lord? This young guy says that, you know, and they put him in armor and he can't even hardly walk. So he says, "No, I can't do that." And what does he have? He has 5 smooth stones and a slingshot. And that's David, not afraid. Would you say maybe that's a kind of pride? But he wasn't proud of himself. He knew where his pride came from. No silly declaration that we are Boston strong will save us. By the way, we cannot beat cancer. We can eat right, we can exercise and choose the best treatments, the best doctors, but we cannot will ourselves to live. To think so is to delude and aggrandize ourselves while ignoring the author of life itself, who has the power to sustain, to save, and to heal. Yet somehow we in America have devolved into a place where we actually believe we can save ourselves. I was in Moscow in 1991. I walked out across from my hotel and went to a park, and in these militaristic societies, all the music you hear is, you know, marches and military themes. You hear it in North Korea, you hear it in Moscow, and all other totalitarian regimes. So their music is playing, the marches are playing, and I'm walking around this park, and I see this big monument. It looks like an Oscar. It's just this big man with bold, you know, big shoulders. He's got his arms crossed, and it's the monument to human achievement. The only problem was The statue had fallen over and was at a side. It was covered with ivy and cobwebs, the monument to human achievement. And I suggest to you that's the foolish to which we are descending. We have lost all sense of God. Our boasts are foolish. Our leaders are often nothing more than court jesters playing the fool. Well, who is this God that I'm talking about, the God that our fathers worshipped, and how can we set this right? Most of you listening in this room believe in God, and most of your motivation, many of you, for public service comes out of your heart to serve Him. To those of you who don't believe in the God of the Bible, the one who calls Himself I am, I cause to be what is. How can you know what's true? Well, this God claims to be truth, and truth can be known by what's real. The God of the Bible is the God of all truth. He can be discovered. I challenge you. In the code of the DNA, the symmetry and complexity of nature, Pascal found him in mathematics, and history itself marks time measured by his son's birth and resurrection. Test him so that you can know that he is true. The longer I serve him, the more I travel, the more I know and see what he has said in his word in the past, in the present, and the future is true. I am by nature a skeptic. I argue about everything. I ask all kinds of questions. But I'm telling you, the longer I serve this God, the more strong my faith in him becomes. I was in Thailand several years ago on the border of Myanmar and went into a refugee camp of the Karen people. We traveled quite a long way to get there. They had nothing except huts and thatched roofs, mud floors. They took us in, and I saw them teaching their kids, though, like the theology of feminism. They were doing the alphabet. They were reciting, and it was in a refugee camp out in the middle of nowhere. They didn't even have enough food. We went into an assembly of their kids, and the kids came in standing straight, on these rough-hewn benches and these mud floors, and they stood and they sang, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord." The Korean people had nothing, and yet they had everything because they knew who this God was. We face a terrible enemy, and we are not Boston strong. The Islamic State is advancing across the Arab world, and here in this city, the Muslim Brotherhood has deeply infiltrated our government and our institutions. North Korea and China and Russia are not our friends. Our borders are porous. We have danger from within and danger from without. What shall we do? I would submit to you we could take on a different kind of pride, a different kind of boast. We can boast of the God who blessed our nation with wealth and resources, transformed many of our personal lives, who is able to accomplish anything. He is the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. I think we boast too little of him to our detriment, so that we become discouraged and without resolve. Dr. Norbert Wohlertson became a friend of mine. I wish he were listening. I wish I knew where he was. He was the son of a Nazi who went into North Korea in penance for what his father had done, actually donated his skin for burn grafts. He loved the North Korean people, and yet he saw the cruelties. And he came back. Dr. Wohlertson's not a Christ follower, but he said to me, "Sandy, the American people do not understand the power of God. They do not understand the power of God." He had been with Christians who were suffering in North Korea. He had seen God's power, and I always think of him. David, before Goliath, this little dude, boasted too. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that should defy the armies of the living God?" He was challenged by this enemy. Standing there, he was inexperienced and small, young and ill-equipped, but he didn't give a weak response. He gave a powerful one. He was bolstered by and filled with incredible and matchless strength of the God I'm talking about. And it is the same God that many of us serve. There is no power that can shake the power of God's people who, in repentance on their knees, bow before him, then rise to meet the challenge. Anybody see those Marines singing at Camp Pendleton, "These are the days of Elijah"? Oh my gosh, it's been on my mind for 24 hours. You have to see it. Go on YouTube. I wish I could show it. Singing, "These are the days of Elijah." There is no God like Jehovah. It's fabulous. Our Marines. Who can save us from our foolish pride and our enemies? Do you remember what else David said to the giant Goliath? This little dude standing before this giant. He said, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or by spirit or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. You know, I don't know if we can save America, but from soldiers in the field to border agents to IRS agents to moms and dads and teachers, when Americans put away their pride, confess their sins, and rise to acknowledge Jehovah God, there is no power on earth that can stop us. Thank you very much.